I cannot live with myself any longer. This was a thought that kept repeating itself in my mind. Then suddenly I became aware of what a peculiar thought it was. Am I one or two? If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me, the I and the self that I cannot live with. Maybe, I thought, only one of them is real.
Hey, welcome to On Books. My name's Chris. I'm really glad to have you here because we're going to talk about a book that I've wanted to talk about for a while. It is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. In this episode, I'm going to share with you what this book means to me, as well as give you some tips and stories from the book so that by the end you feel like you get it. You get the main principles and ideas of The Power of Now. I'm also going to speak with John Keegan. That will be in next week's episode. We're going to speak about the power of now. Now, if you don't know John Keegan, here in New York City, he's known as one of the great, I want to say dating coaches, but he's really more of like a love coach. He connects people. He shows people how to be their best selves. And he uses the power of now and the ideas from it to help people connect. And it's really beautiful. He turned me on to this book about 3 years ago. And since then, I want to say that it's the kind of book that I think about pretty much every day. I mean, maybe not about the book specifically, but the lessons that I've learned, the idea of the now. And, I'm just going to jump right into what that means, because you hear this title and it has this kind of, enlightened spiritual vibe. It's like, what is this power of now whole thing about? What's this thing? It's a New York Times bestseller. Oprah raves about it. Maybe that's not for me. Maybe that's too new agey or whatever. That was kind of what I had heard or thought about it before John really turned me onto it. One of the main ideas that just really spoke to me and that applies to all humans is because we have this consciousness, this idea of in our heads about how things are supposed to be. The now in Power of Now is this moment right now. And what he's talking about, Eckhart Tolle is talking about, is that this moment is the only moment that is ever happening. There is no past or future. Time, it only exists in your head. So I'm going to read. He says, have you ever experienced, done or thought anything or felt anything that was outside of the now? Do you think you ever will? Is it possible for anything to happen or to be outside the now? The answer is obviously not. And that's amazing. I think that's amazingly powerful to just think about how right now, this moment right now, it doesn't matter where you're going after, where you think you're going after. It doesn't matter where you came from. You're here now. And when you go to that after place, so whether it's like, a phone call or an email you have to write or, tucking the kids in or whatever it is, like you will be in the now in that moment. That's the main idea of this book, is that everything that has happened is happening now. Nothing will ever happen in the future. It happens now. And what you think of the past, this kind of memory, this is like a trace that's stored in your mind. That's a former now. And now it's in your head. And it's only, for the most part, in your head. Because when you remember the past, you reactivate each of these in your head. And when do you reactivate the past? Well, right now, when you're thinking of the past. But you're always in the now. So that's a big takeaway. That's something to think about. It's something that I was thinking about today when I was on a bus for 2 hours. And the now was not so good. The now for me in that moment was the fact that I was in traffic and I was late for meeting someone. And it was really stressful. But the stress, in a way, is just something that's in my mind, right? Because in that moment, I'm just a guy sitting on a bus. I was well fed. I had water. I mean, I had some food with me. My mom packed me. Yeah, my mom packed me some lunch today, whatever. Went home today. And that's just, I was fine. But any stress that I feel is like stress of the future. I was stressed that I was going to meet John actually today to chat about this book. I was going to be late. I was maybe a little bit stressed about some conversations that I had earlier with my mom. And my mind was trying to think, how can I get out of that, right? Like, how can I solve that problem? The mind's always trying to solve problems. The mind's always trying to solve problems because, as Eckhart Tolle will tell me, if I can figure out a way to solve this thing that's in my head, I will reach some future salvation. What is that? That is what is fueling this planet, right? Is this idea that in the future, everything is going to be better in the future. Not right now, but in the future. If I only have, if I only meet someone, I'm going to fall in love and then I'm going to be happy. And when I have kids, then I'm going to be happy. If I complete grad school and I get a job to love, then I'm going to be happy. And Eckhart Tolle, he's all like, no, man. All of that wanting and craving desire, that is just an illusion. That's an illusion that you have in your head. Eckhart Tolle, throughout this book, he quotes so many different religious figures, from Buddha to Jesus to the Quran. And to do that, he's basically trying to neutralize, to say, these are all the same story. This is all the same stuff. It's the same being. It's just told in different forms of these religions. And he does that to say that a lot of this is about desire, right? It's about Buddha saying that pain is desire. He talks about that a lot. And he's talking about that future salvation. Oh, everything's going to be better, right? Everything in the future is, if I could do ABC, if I could be rich, I'm going to be the friggin' happiest person in the world. Pleasure is always derived from something outside of you, whereas joy arises from within. He separates. Eckhart Tolle's like, there is a difference between doing and being, right? Pleasure is something that is outside of you. Pleasure is something that you try to do. You try to, score, right? You try to get lucky. You try to drink. You try to have a great night. You try to win an argument. These are all things that are outside of you. The whole book, the point of the now, is that that's all stuff that's in your mind, whereas the state of being is coming from a place of nowness, of enlightenment. So he defines enlightenment now. That's a big word, right, that we hear. Enlightenment is to become free. The power of now is about being joyful. I'm just going to say, hey, you know what? Right now, I'm not going to think about what's outside this door. I'm just going to have my breath. I have my health. Maybe you don't even have your health. Maybe you have your breath. Maybe you have the taste of a strawberry on your tongue. I'm not sure. I don't have all the answers. But all I know is that in this moment, there's something joyful. There's a goodness somewhere inside of you that you can give to other people and that you can just hold. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to prove anything, but it's finding that core of goodness. And from that core of goodness, the doing will likely precipitate. And that's what now is about. It's about finding the good and releasing the craving in the now. Ego. Ego, my ego. A big part of ego here. Man, when I was at Burning Man a few years ago, I saw one of the most beautiful things that, after reading this book, really ignited, so to speak, my heart. This was 2012, and I rode my bike deep out into the desert. I sound like a mad hippie right now, but I rode my bike deep out into the desert, and there was this art installation of 3 letters that were made of, I don't even know, just like knickknacks and doll heads. And it was towering 12 feet above my head. And it was just EGO. These 3 letters, all bronze, out in the middle of the desert. I found ego. And I came back 2 nights later because it was just beautiful. I came back at a nighttime and I watched it burn. That's what happens at Burning Man. Somebody just burned this art down. They created it to destroy it, just to put it into the world. And in a way, it's not destroyed because it's in my mind right now. I carry it with me. I carry it with me in my being, this idea of ego and what it means to dissolve it, but to still have it. I fight my ego. I don't think I understood what the word ego meant until I read The Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle writes, the term ego means different things to different people, but when I use it here, I mean a false self created by unconscious identifications with the mind. Ego is the false self. By ego, he means the identity, what I call myself. A few pages later, he lists this beautiful list, the most common ego identifications. And I want you to listen, and I want you to tell me if you can relate to ways that you identify with yourself. Maybe a different question, a different way to put that is, if you were to lose your knowledge, your education, your belief system, if you were to lose these identifications, who would you be? So here's the list: knowledge, education, belief system, your family history, your relationships, your physical appearance. That's a good one. Your social status, the work you do. How many of us clamor? What would you do if you didn't have the job that you are? What if you were no longer a teacher? If you were no longer a lawyer, your profession? Who would you be? Well, I know who I would be. I would feel lost. I'm not going to admit that it's like there is some kind of identification with who I am, right? If I couldn't speak of my education or my job, who am I? That's a question, right? But that is who I am. I am that being. I am that state that is behind all of those signposts, all of those labels. That doesn't mean anything in a way. It just means in my mind something, right? Something I project into the world. But the ego in this present moment, it hardly exists, right? The past and future are considered important to the ego, right? Oh, I did this in the past. Oh, I'm going to do this. These are the stories we tell us. But right now, it doesn't matter as much. The problem is that the ego is this thing that's in our head. It's that voice in your head that is constantly keeping the past alive, because without it, it is fearful. You fear that you are going to be like, oh, who am I? And so Eckhart Tolle asks you to observe your ego. He says he wants you to be the watcher and just to watch these moments in the present when you find yourself identifying with the ego. Because it's the ego and your identification with the ego that is going to cause you pain. Because think about it this way: when your ego is at risk of losing or threatening your ego, when your ego is threatened, that is where fear comes from, right? Oh, I might lose my status at my job. I am losing my possessive noun, love, my love. She is mine, he is mine, whatever. When you lose that, or there's a threat of that, you feel fear. And when someone threatens you with fear, you cannot cope. You cannot cope because you begin to see a future that is going to be horrible, quote unquote, right? You cannot cope with the present moment because the future is now impending upon you, because the past, who you think you are, and the future, who you think you should be, is at a disconnect. And Eckhart Tolle, he would say, there's now. This is all there is. There's now. There is no future. There is no past. Now, this is a hard thing. If you're hearing this for the first time, it's like you roll in your eyes a little bit. You're like, all right, whatever. And this, I don't get this, right? But I just want to believe that if you take a second, the next time you get stressed and your ego is at charge, someone is threatening your ego, just take a breath and just ask yourself, how does it feel? How does it feel when someone insults you, or when someone doesn't give you credit for something you or feel you deserve credit for? How does that feel? And that right there, that is the true now. That is you identifying with the pain in your body. And I've found some great healing in that, in being able to just admit, how does that make me feel? And authentically talking and having a conversation around that feeling instead of just letting my mind race and try to solve the problem. Oh, okay. How can I do this? This is good. This is bad. I identify with this. I don't, right? That kind of layer of the mind above your feeling. I can't feel the present because I'm already thinking, someone's talking to me and I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say instead of absorbing and letting that in. Then I never feel balanced, right? Because I'm always like 3 steps ahead in my head, but never truly present. And that hurts me when I have that, and it hurts the person you're with because they're not being fully heard, because you're already off in your mind making stories about how this is going to affect you. And that's the power of now. That is the power of being fully present with another person, with yourself, and just feeling it. I've been trying to feel alone. I've wanted to, I know that sounds strange. Let me explain. In the moment of nowness in New York City, where I live, it is hard to feel the feeling of aloneness. I became aware of this. I don't recall, but some point this year, between looking at my calendar for the past month and seeing that every single night, maybe in June, I had went out, and I'd been out with some different person, around town or late at work or seeing a show or something, right? And then looking and going, I've never been alone, and thinking also about a lot of people who I know outside of New York City who do spend quite a bit of time alone, and thinking about how they just have this different reality than I have. And also thinking about how creativity comes from being alone. I believe that. It's something I believe from reading Rilke and a lot of great artists, and depriving myself of that aloneness, and then wondering if my relationships and my creativity were being like, what's the word? Like not fully realized or something, like not given their day in court or something, like that. I was like depriving myself because I wasn't feeling alone. So a concrete example might be, if I never feel alone, then am I just numbing myself all the time with distractions, right? And if I'm numbing myself with all distractions, like if I'm going out, then I could do that like a fish eating food and just kind of kill myself with FOMO and distractions and never have like true connection with the voice and the feeling of my body, and like how I actually feel about certain things, to sit with it. Or to sit with relationships, to getting into like a more long-term kind of relationship that might be feelings like, I don't know, whatever that feels like for me. Even right now I get like chills a little bit, like what does that feel like? So being with people becomes an addiction, right? Being busy is an addiction. The mind is this disease, is what Eckhart Tolle is saying. Your mind is a disease that's constantly racing, trying to figure out how do I solve these problems and trying to get to the future. And in that, there is a refusal to face and move through your own pain, to move through my own pain, because I can't feel it because I'm constantly thinking of other things, right? And that's why these substances that we're addicted to, like alcohol, food, drugs, all this stuff, they just cover up the pain in the moment. You're not feeling it because you're so busy with all these things, right? And the reason there's unhappiness in your life, or that you feel this unhappiness, is because these things that make you feel pleasure are outward, outside of your body. And while they bring you pleasure, they also bring out the pain, because that's at the core of your being if you're not feeling it in this now. Every addiction does that. Every addiction also reaches a point where it's not going to work for you. This is one reason why people are always trying to escape from the present moment and into some kind of future salvation, right? This thing in the future that I will encounter that will resolve my pain. Eckhart Tolle writes, avoidance of relationships in an attempt to avoid pain is not the answer either. Cannot avoid getting into relationships and say, hey, they don't affect me. The pain is going to be there. So for example, like 3 failed relationships, right? If you have many failed relationships, it's going to be a way better way to get in touch with your pain, because in that moment, you're going to feel that aloneness and say, this doesn't work for me. You're going to learn what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Whereas no failed relationships or no relationships at all is just hiding in a room from pain. You're not feeling the now. Your mind is racing and trying to solve these problems. If you could bring intense presence into your aloneness, he writes, that would work. So this is what the power of now has brought me, kind of a powerful feeling of the now moment, a kind of practice that I come back to. I've read this book a few times. I've listened to the audiobook at least once or twice. And it's like a meditation. It's like this kind of like, when shit gets crazy in my head, I know that I can kind of listen to it, feel a sense of calm. And then when crazy arises, right? When stress arises, just breathing and just thinking about what's happening right now versus what am I telling myself, is happening. Getting rid of that past and that future and just focusing, it can really make a difference. It's really made a difference for me. And so I'm really grateful for having read this, and I really appreciate Eckhart Tolle for writing this book.
Dance with me, my old friend, once before we go. Let's pretend this song won't end, and we never have to go home. And we'll dance among the chandeliers, and nothing matters when we're dancing.
All right, thanks for listening to On Books. Next week, stay tuned because I'll be chatting with John Keegan about the power of now. He is a dating coach in New York City, and he uses these ideas that we just chatted about the power of now. He uses them in his dating and in his relationships, and I find it fascinating. So if you want to hear more about the power of now and how it's applied to that part of life, stay tuned. All right, On Books, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm on @BooksShow. I'm also on Facebook /OnBooksShow. The website's on-books.com, where I usually put a lot of show notes and stuff there. You can subscribe on iTunes. You can know that my name is Chris Castiglione. You can know that the episode editor is a great man named Gabriel Urbina. And you should probably know that this song is by the Magnetic Fields, and it's called Nothing Matters When We're Dancing. Check it out.
And nothing matters when we're dancing. In tatters, you're in